Hi, I'm Ann Rieselbach, the League's Program Director. Welcome to this month's FF Distance Edition, featuring the work of LMN Architects, who are based in Seattle. Created in 2020, the FF series is an online reinvention of the League's monthly in-person First Friday studio tours and project reviews. And like First Fridays, these programs provide the opportunity to see recent and current projects, as well as to get a sense of where and how firms are working. Like many offices who are now working a hybrid schedule, juggling work from home and in-person studio time, this season the League is alternating in-person First Fridays in New York City offices with online visits to studios nationwide. All of the programs feature practices navigating the legacies and possibilities of American infrastructure, from ecological systems and transit hubs to community facilities and social networks. Future programs include in-person visits to the New York City offices of FX Collaborative and HOK, and an online-only virtual visit to the Boston-based firm Lear's Winesapple. Now to Seattle and today's studio visit, which will be introduced and moderated by Lauren Gallo. Lauren is a design journalist with bylines in Architectural Digest, Interior Design, Dwell, Metropolis, and Cultured, and more. She is the editorial co-chair of the Pacific Northwest Design Platform Arcade, a Seattle nonprofit, and she contributes regularly to the Seattle Times and Northwest regional titles. Lauren holds an MA in Art and Architectural History and regularly teaches architectural history and design, writing workshops in Seattle and beyond. Following the presentation and Lauren's conversation with the LMN team, the discussion will be open to all attendees. You can pose your questions in the Q&A section, not the chat section, the Q&A section. And before we begin, as always, a big thank you to the League sponsors. This program is supported in part by the New York State Council on the Arts with the support of the Office of the Governor and the New York State Legislature, as well as by the League's members, whose annual support makes all of our programs and events possible. Please visit archleague.org for further information about membership and the League's upcoming events, as well as past programs. And then finally, towards the end of the program, information will be posted in the chat section for those seeking CEUs for the event. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Anne. It's a great pleasure to be joining you from Seattle and taking part in the Architectural League of New York's First Friday lecture series today. It's my honor to introduce LMN Architects and 5 of their talented designers who are joining us today. We have LMN partner Scott Crawford, partner Osama Quotah, associate Hanna Kato, principal Leonardo da Costa, and associate Vanessa Abin-Fuentes. Based here in Seattle, Washington, LMN was founded in 1979 and is now entering their 44th year of practice. For over 4 decades, LMN has been rigorously and steadfastly shaping a new way of designing infrastructure and public-facing projects, one defined by collaboration, a deep sense of curiosity, and a careful balance of the technical and the humane. What has always struck me about LMN's work is the sense of approachability they manage to achieve in public projects of every scale and in locations across the US and Canada. From massive civic projects like convention centers and museums, to spaces for higher education, including research centers and classroom buildings, to public infrastructure projects like bridges, ferry terminals, and light rail stations, LMN's work is united by an underlying sense of welcoming approachability, one that reaches out and draws people in without feeling overly precious or choreographed. The firm achieves this by always holding on to the bigger picture. They're deeply concerned with the larger context of their work and how their projects affect the landscapes, communities, and civic networks of which they are a part. Zooming out even more, I admire LMN's holistic approach to sustainability and their attentiveness to what it means to design for a changing climate. Theirs is a quietly rigorous and research-based approach to sustainability, one that is deeply context-driven rather than one-size-fits-all. Their in-house research teams are constantly driving towards the most resilient and efficient design solutions, And not only that, but in true LMN fashion, the firm prioritizes the sharing and distribution of their research. Right now, for example, you can visit LMN's website and find a trove of resources around many topics, one of which being their ambitious path towards zero carbon and the many complex factors surrounding this admirable goal. At the same time, LMN pays close attention to the micro scale, zooming in on how details and the physical parts of buildings come together. Always with an eye towards doing less with more, LMN incorporates elements like light and shadow to activate spaces and bring life and texture to the built environment. Large or small, macro or micro, LMN designs spaces that elevate the social experience and remind us that we're all in this together. The firm's work has been honored with more than 300 international, national, and regional awards, including over 100 awards from the American Institute of Architects. This includes 13 national AIA honor awards, as well as the AIA's coveted National Firm Award, which LMN received in 2016. And as Anne said at the beginning today, as we hear from LMN, we would love to have you post your questions using the Q&A button below, and then we'll have time to answer them at the end. So now please join me in extending a warm welcome to LMN Architects, and specifically to LMN partner Scott Crawford, who will be kicking off the presentation. Scott?
Hello, thank you, Lauren. All right, so I'm going to be leading us off here and give maybe some graphic backup to some of the facts that Lauren just offered. And then we're going to go through 4 projects and try to cover them fairly quickly and give you a sense of how we try to bring our thinking to bear on each of these different scales and project types. So let's get started. So we're located in the Puget Sound region in Seattle. So this map is showing the Puget Sound. We're in downtown Seattle. We've been in that area for 44 years now in the building highlighted there, the Norton building. We're just a few blocks from the waterfront and a few blocks from the historic Pioneer Square neighborhood. We are one interdisciplinary studio of around 150 people right now, covering 2 floors within the building. We have architects, we have urban planners, interior designers, fabricators, and artists on staff. We have an open office with lots of activity going on. Within that, there are no enclosed offices within the entire space, so you kind of get to hear a little bit of everything going on within the space, and surrounded by lots of models and prototypes of the work that we're doing. In addition to the time that we spend working together, we love hanging out together, and on every Thursday we have an event called Spotlight where we get together for some drinks and snacks, and we have employees share what they're doing outside of the office as a way of further connecting us and enriching the work that we do. And that work spans across the entire area of North America. And what's great about being able to work across the entire country is that we get to work with a lot of different collaborators. So whether that's other architecture firms or engineers or scientists in the area, and even artists and fabricators, all of them help to bring a richness to the work that we do and expand what we are capable of. And oftentimes with any of the projects that we're working on, we're looking to take and really accentuate the types of activities that are going to be happening in those spaces, whether that be showcasing objects and art within museums or creating performance spaces for people to enjoy the work of others, creating convention centers that are tightly knit into their urban fabric for gathering and exchanging of ideas, higher ed and K through 12 facilities that allow for the transfer of knowledge, workplaces that bring companies together throughout the Northwest as well as across the country. And then also infrastructure projects that are creating connections and moving people back and forth. So to supplement all of that collaborative environment that we get from the interactions that we have with others, we also have our own desire constantly to learn about new things that we could be incorporating into our process. So in 2009, we founded a group within the office called LMN Tech Studio, looking at emerging technologies, both in the hardware and software side of things, and trying to find ways of embedding these new technologies into our workflow. And part of that is initially happening on the fringe of the office, but then as things start to gain traction, we start to bring it to bear on our projects. So here's examples of being able to take and use tools like digital fabrication to influence how we build models, mock-ups, and prototypes. Really always looking to take and get our 3D designs out of the computer and into physical reality, since in the end, that is ultimately what we're aiming to do. It's also fun to be able to take those skills that we develop and experiment with them at larger scales and build things like this pavilion that we did for the Seattle Design Festival, where we're taking and working with engineers to figure out the structure of this. We're fabricating all of the elements ourselves, including all the lighting and the programming of that. And these types of experiments then come to influence the things that we further explore on our projects. And by doing enough of those experiments, we get to put ourselves into places where we do things that are maybe a bit unexpected of an architecture firm, such as in this project that we did for the Seattle Symphony called Octave 9. We actually designed, fabricated, and delivered the entire ceiling system for this project, which has led us in new directions of trying to imagine what else could we maybe build on our projects. We tinker and we build our own sensing devices so that we can better track post-occupancy data within spaces. And we then try to share that outwardly into the world. And then are constantly looking at the choices that we make on projects and the materials that we consider. And again, being able to take and share those lessons that we learn with the outside world. And then Lauren mentioned our Path to Zero Carbon series that we've been working on that try to really get to the question of how are we going to solve this issue. And then always trying to find a way of bringing these lessons that we learn back to our projects to make sure that we're incorporating those lessons into bettering our work. And part of that sharing comes down to needing to constantly gather people, both internal to ourselves as well as external together to exchange ideas. So that set us about recently looking around the neighborhood and peering into some empty storefronts to try to understand how could we take and bring a space up from our office, the activity happening there, out onto the streets. And we recently have been completing the renovation of this bank space where we're going to have now a 6,000 square foot shop space that'll also double as an event space that we can take and engage things like First Thursday art walks within the neighborhood. So all of that's a little bit of a background in terms of the context of how we like to see the work that we do. And we're going to take and cover 4 projects today, all of various different types and various scales. And I'm going to start us off by moving into the Grand Avenue Park Bridge. So this is located about 40 minutes north of Seattle, right along the coast of the Puget Sound. So here you can see a little bit of the rest of that site. Pacific Northwest, if you've never been here, is quite a beautiful area with the mountains and water bodies all around and very lush and green. And one of the challenges on this project is we're trying to take and connect from a park in a historic neighborhood that is actually 75 feet above the surrounding area to the west, where we have a marina, a farmer's market, and a future waterfront development that's currently going on. They needed for this project to take and bring a set of utility pipes across. And so that was the primary requirement initially for the project, to get over the train tracks and the highway with those utility pipes. Now, in the Northwest, we have to deal with seismic activity. So one of the challenges of this project was, given that 75-foot tall, unstable bluff, we really didn't want to have an elevator or stair embedded on that east side, the right side of the span. And also on the west side where the elevator tower is, we need to limit the height of that tower so that we can ensure that we're not adversely affected by the seismic activity. So that led us to a unique configuration for this truss, where instead of walking into the middle of the truss like you would on most bridges, you actually start by walking out on the top of it. And this was something that, by working closely with the engineers, we came up with a solution that we could take and tip the entire truss to limit the height of the elevator tower on the west. And in the process, create this really dynamic experience where if you're traveling on wheels, either wheelchair, bicycle, stroller, you have the ability to always stay on a sloped walkway to gradually bring you down to the elevator on the other side. And then if you're able to, you can take and go right down the middle and cut through a stair that then brings you to the stair at the west end that wraps around the entire thing. So a requirement on a project like this is always having guardrails, but then in cases when we're over top of the train tracks, we need to expand the height of that to 10 feet to have a throw barrier. And so we're looking at elements like this and trying to think, how can we bring a more human scale to this and a texture to it that contrasts with the infrastructure scale of that overall truss, and something that maybe a little bit more delicate, and then also bringing some of that patterning onto the elevator tower on the west side. So starting out with this idea, we're generating parametric models that allow us to track every single one of those panels. We're also considering how the pattern that we're putting into the panel would be fabricated, what tools would be used, and also how can we use differentiation within that pattern to give us some performance effects. In this case, being able to have more solid areas closer to those lights to reflect the light down onto the deck, and then in areas where we want views out, being able to open that pattern up. One of the things that we've had a lot of success with doing that we really then enjoy participating with is being able to provide a level of documentation for these custom elements that allow us to provide a fabricator with enough information that they can easily go about making these pieces. And so that's more than just drawing the pattern, but being able to label every panel to show them we know all the different parts that we're tracking, being able to give them metrics like these numbers that show them how many lineal inches of cut they would have to have, or the surface area of every one of those panels. And in this particular situation, we even took it to the point where we provided cut files laid out for the CNC machine that we coordinated with the actual fabricator so that we could go direct to fabrication with our geometry that we had already created and not have to worry about a shop drawing process. At the completely other end of the scale for this project, there's the excitement when it comes to a bridge project of being able to see these things come together in a way that maybe buildings don't always have the same opportunity, where we're constructing this over 280-foot long object along the side of the highway that then gets lifted up. And over the course of 8 hours, a transporter slowly moved it into place and parked it and dropped it onto its foundations. And I think what's really great about this, in addition to just seeing the engineering feat of it, is watching all of the community come out for this event and seeing the excitement around the delivery of this bridge. So then here are some shots of it finishing up. We paid a lot of attention during the design of this project to the materials that were being used, ensuring that we have materials that require minimum maintenance over top of the highway and railroad tracks. So using weathering steel as well as bare aluminum for the throw barrier panels, incorporating details that give more of a human scale to this and a delicate touch and something of intrigue in the areas where people are directly interacting with the structure. And I think what's been great for us in seeing this open and why we love doing this type of work is the excitement that the community has about this, and seeing how well loved it is already as a structure, that people are not just connecting from that park side over to the waterfront side, but it becomes an area that's almost like a playground of watching kids go back and forth on their scooters and bicycles and skateboards, and really using it as something that they can interact with more than just cross. Just a few more shots of moving through that. And I think the richness for us within this, being in the Northwest, is it's something that we can always go out and visit, and it's a great spot to actually be able to enjoy views of the Pacific Northwest. And with that, I'm going to hand it off to Osama so that he can walk us through another project just up the coast from this one.
So I'm going to talk about the Mukilteo Ferry Terminal. And like the Grand Avenue Park Bridge, the Mukilteo Ferry Terminal is another piece of critical civic infrastructure that sits on the edge of the Salish Sea, and really is another collaboration with the same engineer, with KPFF engineers. The ferry terminal is one of the busiest ferry routes on the West Coast, and they move about 4 million riders every year. However, this is also the historical lands and waters of the tribes of the Coast Salish people. It's where they have lived for over 10,000 years, and the tribes exist today. They're present, and their living culture continues to have an important presence in the Pacific Northwest. The new terminal is located on the 1855 land where the Treaty of Point Elliott occurred. That was a treaty which was signed by the local Coast Salish tribes ceding millions of acres of land that they lived on to the US government, but guaranteeing perpetual hunting and fishing rights to the tribes on these ancestral lands. But during World War II, the site became an auxiliary fueling facility due to its proximity to the newly built Snohomish County Airport. And after decommissioning the site in the 1990s, it was clear that reconciliation was needed, both environmentally and culturally, to restore the site as a place, as an important place as we started planning the work and looking at what it would mean to have a new ferry terminal on the site. So the project team worked with the Coast Salish Tribes, visiting the tribes on their land with drawings, with physical models, listening and incorporating their history and environmental stewardship into the concepts for the project. And what resulted is this two-story terminal, a contemporary spin on a traditional Northwest longhouse, the type of building that is traditionally used by the Coast Salish community for gathering and for ceremonies, but using materials such as steel, glass, and heavy timber, a nod to the fusion of the past and the present, the traditional and the contemporary. Of course, environmental stewardship was really important to us in the design, and the project includes careful site planning, careful stormwater management, passive air systems, minimal energy consumption, and an all-electric mechanical system. And we have the goal of the project being net zero carbon by 2030. All of this, of course, was inspired by the native guiding principle to live light on the earth. The large south-facing shed roof supports about 408 PV panels, which supply 40% of the terminal's electric demand. We incorporated daylighting and views, of course, essential as you look out to the Salish Sea. While operable windows are used to naturally ventilate and passively cool the project, we use computational fluid dynamic modeling to inform the sizing of the rack and pinion window system, which automatically opens and closes in response to changing temperatures, optimizing airflow for the passengers, and providing thermal comfort within the facility. The project utilizes FSC certified wood, mass timber, and CLT panels, which help to reduce the project's embodied carbon. But cedar is also a very important material for the tribes in the region, for the Coast Salish tribes, and is used throughout their cultural work. In addition to using the wood, we also worked very closely with a number of Native American artists who incorporated their cultural works throughout the project, representing the region's rich tribal heritage and creating this atmosphere of welcoming and belonging. The cedar toll booths that you see here receive over 4 million ferry passengers annually, and they have adorned on them a pair of 16-foot tall Coast Salish welcome figures by a Squamish artist that greet everybody who enters this territory in the traditional way, hands outstretched and palms facing the sky in respect and honor. Being a ferry terminal, it was also important that the water side was thought through, and just as important as it opens up to the incoming passengers. But in addition to cars, the terminal is an integral link in a chain of regional train, bus, pedestrian, and bicycle networks, with a new waterfront promenade connecting from downtown Mukilteo through the terminal and onto the beach, creating an elevated pathway for public use, encouraging connectivity in and out through the community, with the knowledge that walk-on and bike-on ridership is set to double in the next 20 years. We really see this project as a piece of urban infrastructure, a piece of civic infrastructure, and a model for how local, state, and tribal governments can work together, representing what's possible when the community and the design team collaborate to support a shared vision. A contemporary expression that captures the deep cultural legacy of the place. And I wanted to jump from this to another project that we have, again, on the water's edge, along the Salish Sea, and it's the Seattle Aquarium. And we're working now on an addition for the Seattle Aquarium that's called the Ocean Pavilion. Now, the Seattle Aquarium is a conservation organization that's been rethinking how to amplify their impact beyond the walls of their institution. And as they think about this, they've been thinking about it in the broadest terms, what it means for our planet, what it means for our communities, and how they can affect change. But as we approach the site, which you see here, we have this barrier between the existing Seattle Aquarium and the city. In the 1940s, Seattle's connection to the waterfront was severed by this double-decker highway. So the city decided to remove the viaduct and replace it with a public promenade along the water's edge, designed by James Corner Field Operations, with the aquarium expansion at the most important intersection along the waterfront, connecting the Pike Place Market, which is an important cultural heritage site in our city, out to the Salish Sea, and transversing this steep topography that we have in our city. And by putting the Ocean Pavilion in this location, it's really a statement of values by the community in Seattle to make a place of conservation central to the waterfront experience, and a place to heal the relationship between the land and the water and the cultural history of our city. And like on the Mukilteo project, there was this early acknowledgement that through this work, we had to change the dynamic around engagement. We needed to have an inclusive process that acknowledged the cultural history of the land and the importance of this place for the local tribes. The design process started with early collaboration, early consultation and engagement that included visiting the tribes on their land. We brought on a team of tribal consultants who became a part of our team and participated in design conversations. And we workshopped with tribal youth and tribal elders to understand how they saw themselves in this project. So now that the viaduct is gone, and the ocean and the promenade and the Ocean Pavilion are under construction, this is kind of the vision for where we're going. The mass of the building is located where the double-decker highway used to be, but the building is shifted to the south to create this public amphitheater where the piers pull apart, providing an unobstructed view out to the water. The roof of the Ocean Pavilion provides a mix of plants, plazas, and seating areas with views back out to the water, to our working waterfront, and to the large kind of landscape that we have, the mountains and the Salish Sea, creating this amazing civic experience on all faces of the project, and connecting back to Field Operations Overlook Walk project, which provides a seamless pedestrian experience from the waterfront back to the city. Sustainability and our relationship to the ocean was an integral part of the project. Sustainable strategies were tied to the mission of the institution, focusing on the health of the Salish Sea, plastics and materials, climate change, resilience, and we continue to study aggressive targets around energy and carbon reduction, and are working with the aquarium to identify sustainable strategies at the larger campus scale that they can incorporate. So as you move to the exterior, this side of the Ocean Pavilion that faces out west towards the ocean was meant to capture the large natural landscapes that we have and the character of the Pacific Northwest coast. The siding is composed of cedar timbers, again, an important material for the tribes. And we source them from sustainably harvested wood from tribally managed forests as a means to also provide economic benefit to the tribes that we were working with. The wood cladding at this location, at this knuckle, pulls away and provides views from the aquarium out to the water and glimpses back into the aquarium and the exhibits inside, providing a moment, the civic moment, where everyone is invited to participate and engage in the experience. As you approach the building from the south, you also get this wonderful cross-section where the activity of the promenade, the activity on the roof, and the life of the facility all come together in this unifying civic. And we've been working with a Coast Salish Lummi artist named Dan Friday, whose public artwork will engulf the building entry. These are pictures of Dan in our office as we've been working with him on lighting, constructability, developing mock-ups, and really figuring out how to incorporate the artwork in with the architecture in a meaningful way. And the goal is to have the artwork integrated into the soffit at the front entry of the building, as a welcoming element with themes that recognize tribal sovereignty and fishing rights in the Pacific Northwest. And at the bottom of that entry soffit, among Dan's artwork, will be an oculus that provides public views into our largest exhibit, the Coral Canyon, or the Reef, which is another moment where everyone can participate in the cultural stories, the civic experience, and the conservation messaging of the aquarium.
Thanks, Osama. So looking at a section of the building, here's that oculus window Osama was just showing us. Guests enter the building through the lobby and circulate up through a series of ramps to our main gallery, which is highly interactive and full of a lot of multimedia content. Guests extend up the spiral stair and arrive at our largest habitat, which is a structural feat of engineering. It holds 350,000 gallons, and just based off the hydrostatic pressure alone of the water, increased our concrete walls up to 24 inches thick. At which point our structural engineer told us we were basically holding up the roof for free and we gained a shear wall. So the design of our tank, we designed parametrically using a series of digital models, which were absolutely essential in collaboration with consultants, but also contractors and directly with manufacturers. The exhibit features elasmobranchs from the Indo-Pacific Ocean. So that's animals like stingrays, guitarfish, small reef sharks. The rockwork is used to replicate the animal's native habitat, but also to conceal window views from each other and to conceal our LSS piping, which is essentially HVAC for fish. So we have a series of supply piping that we've actually directed at windows to help keep the windows clean, a series of vacuum ports that divers can actually connect into to clean the tank, and then a series of skimmers and sumps that return the water back to the LSS equipment, so like fractionators and degas towers. We had a lot of really fun animal requirements to work with on this project. For example, a 45-foot diameter is the comfortable swimming radius of a shark, who tend to stay at the surface of the water. Stingrays, they like to lay and rest in different sand beds. So we had to design, and we had to have a specific ratio of animals to sand beds in the project. So we had to work with the aquarium on their animal count for the exhibit. And then once stingrays lay in the sand, though, it sticks to their bellies, so they become these little sandpaper discs. So to keep them from scuffing up the oculus window over time, we actually added a big arc to it to discourage animals from laying on it and scuffing it up. During design, we did a series of lighting mock-ups to really understand the reflections and refractions that happen in the water. And we used that information to help us lay out our lighting and make sure the rockwork was adequately lit for the animals. Rockwork, however, is really heavy, so we took that clay model and we scanned it and we brought it back into our digital models and ran a full structural analysis to confirm that our concrete could handle the additional load. At the end of design, we rationalized the final form and introduced as many flat planes as possible, singularly curved planes, so that we could really control costs and help constructability. We also used these planes to determine the rebar orientation, and once we got into construction, the contractors modeled every single piece of rebar, every layer, every splice, every lap, every transition, because we had to. We had series that for months we had weekly meetings with the contractors, the concrete subs, the rebar subs, the structural engineers, everybody's detailers, everybody's modelers, to work through and figure out every clash and every transition, which was highly successful. We had a couple of field modifications, but the end result was about 1 million pounds of rebar, which is about equivalent to a 60-story shear wall. For the actual form of the tank, we handed our digital models directly to the contractor and the manufacturer. They worked with Janicki, who's an aerospace manufacturer, and they actually CNC'd foam to create the form for the inside and the outside surface of the walls, which came in 250 panels that the contractor assembled on site. We didn't want any cold joints in the water level, so the contractor actually poured the entire tank in one single pour, which, because of our unique geometry, meant that lower bowl they were pouring completely blind. So it took them about 21 hours. This is where we are today. They're starting to strip off the forms and reveal the concrete underneath. And with that, I'll pass you over to Vanessa and Leo.
Yeah, so I'm now going to talk a little bit about the Seattle Convention Center Summit Building, which is a project. Wait a sec. Yeah, no, I'm not muted. which is a project that opened last week here in Seattle. So starting with where the project is, this is beautiful Seattle with the site for the convention center expansion highlighted here with the red pen. The expansion site sits in this really interesting intersection of neighborhoods here in the core of Seattle. It's just a block away from the existing convention center, walking distance to a number of hotels, restaurants, bars. You know, when people come to visit Seattle, this is where they want to be. Also very close to the waterfront and the Pike Place Market. I like to share this diagram here because this is a diagram that shows a graphic representation of the public benefits package for this project. One way of talking about this project is just focusing on the physical perimeter of the building and saying this is the footprint of the building. But I think the way that we like to talk about this project is actually a little bit different. We like to talk about this project as this being the real footprint of this building, which shows the impact actually of this project in our community. This is a mixed-use project. We designed the convention center, but we also designed 2 co-development towers. There's a residential tower and an office tower, and the two sit actually on top of the convention center below grade loading dock over here. And the office tower is actually under construction right now. One of the main interesting and unique points of this convention center is how the program is actually stacked. This is a very unique for how convention centers work. And the bottom here, you see the exhibit hall sitting below grade. This is a long span room, 150,000 square feet. And above that, we have the lobby, the main lobby with the market. I'm going to talk a little bit about this later in the presentation. Then above the ground level with the lobby and the market, we have another exhibition hall, 100,000 square feet, another long span room. Then we have 2 meeting room levels, and completing the stack, we have another long span room, which is a ballroom, 58,000 square feet. What makes that stack unique is the stack of long span over long span over long span room. One of the things from the beginning of the project, because we're building in a downtown area where available land is more limited, we didn't have enough real estate to have one contiguous exhibit hall space for the 250,000 square feet in one contiguous level. So we know from the beginning that we had to split the program into 2 different levels. And the way that we dealt with that was to actually create a series of floor openings between the 2, creating this atrium space here that actually connects through the whole height of the building and ends on a skylight. To the left here, you can kind of see an image of that space and all the visual connectivity that you have, the views out, and the amount of natural light that that skylight brings into the building. This is an aerial view of the project. Again, the exhibit hall is below grade. Then at grade, you have an entry plaza that connects to the main lobby. We have the market area over here. This volume here is the flexible hall that occupies basically the full footprint at that level. We have the 2 levels of meeting and the ballroom on top. And then here, what you see is actually the outdoor event terrace for this project, which we think is very cool because on 2 sides of this space, you're framed by the building itself. And on the other 2 sides, actually what is framing you is the city skyline. And then you can see here the top of 2 historic buildings that are also framed that space. The space that you see here, we call it the hill climb. This is on the south facade of the building. This portion here of the facade, as you can see, it actually cantilevers over the sidewalk. So getting inside the hill climb, it's basically one of the 2 main circulation spines that we have in this building. You can see over here a set of escalators. There's a set of stairs. And then this area over here, this is that area actually that cantilevers over the sidewalk. This is a tiered seating along this south-facing window. This is a view of that space looking south. And then because of the amount of glazing that we have here, you can see how the skyline of the city starts becoming a big part of how you actually experience this, this building. This is still on the hill climb, now looking west. This is that south wall. This is that tiered seating area that cantilevers over the sidewalk. And because it's over the sidewalk, then we were able to have this west-facing window with unobstructed views all the way to the Salish Sea. And you can actually see the Pike Place Market sign from there as well. This is a picture, you know, after construction of that same space. This is a view also part of the south and showing a little bit more of the east side of the building. We have extensive quantities of glazing around the building perimeter. And this is bringing natural light not only into the public areas and circulation, but also into the main event spaces. You can see here the window for the flexible hall, and then here the window for the ballroom. One of the ideas that we had is that we wanted all the event spaces in this building actually to have some form of window. This is a rendering that we used during design for inside the ballroom. And this is a picture of inside that space now after construction. Again, Seattle as the backdrop and how you experience the building. This is a wood ceiling that we did for this design specifically for this room. And I believe Vanessa is going to tell you a little bit more stories about the use of wood in general in this project. This is an image of the north side. Again, there's an entry here on the north side as well. There's the public market that retails facing 9th Avenue, and they also open up into the building lobby. The flex hall volume here, these elements that you see here, these are planters on the building's facade. And then going to the next, the other corner, this on the south side, the entry plaza market, you see how the flexible hall also have a window on that side. And you could see actually the west-facing window, the terrace, and the signature meeting room. And then once you get inside the lobby, this is what we call the mixing zone. This is what we consider the more public side of the convention center lobby, with retail to the side here, and the registration hall for the convention center to the left. And this is a good segue for Vanessa.
Yes. So as you saw on Leo's pictures that he shared, wood is a very prominent part of all of these spaces. And this is because the design team really wanted to connect the visitors coming to the conventions here back to their immediate surroundings. And what better way to do it than with wood, given the long and rich history in Seattle of the lumber industry. And so early on, we understood that models and full-scale mock-ups were going to be a crucial part of our design process. Really trying to understand the complexity of these systems and how might somebody assemble it. Understanding the materiality constraints. As Leo mentioned, the ballroom ceiling, for example, has thousands of salvaged warm wood boards that are coming from decommissioned log booms. So we really wanted to engage with the material with our hands. Also, lighting becoming so critical. And how do you start lighting pieces of wood to really accentuate their warmth and texture? But also leveraging our shop capabilities and fabrication mindset that we had been building up along the way. So I want to use the chandelier as an example to dive deeper into this design process. As Leo mentioned, this is the main entrance for the entire building. This is 180 feet long chandelier that hovers above the entrance. We like to say it's the biggest chandelier in the world. Debate's still out. But it really gives a glimpse to the visitors of the amazing spaces that they will find along the way. So we started with here in-house in our office with scaled models. And this little guy was crucial in how we started to understand the sequencing of the assembly of this and how to compartmentalize it in simple ways that we can engage in conversations with the fabricator. So we learned that the the best way to assemble it would be to create it in planes. And so using this jig made it a lot more streamlined of a process where we could lay sticks down and start screwing them and then repeat the process over and over again. And then threading through sticks perpendicular to these planes to create the three-dimensionality of the piece. With the scale mock-up or model, we also started to explore lighting, but we quickly learned that we were limited by the size of the light source. So we scaled up. We worked with the client and the contractor and acquired a warehouse down in Soto, south of downtown Seattle, where we built 4 of these systems in full-scale mock-ups. And this was such a valuable learning experience. I mean, once you have conversations with the contractor, you really get to engage with things that you don't usually engage with when you're just looking at a 3D model, like the sizing limitations of scissor lifts, or how much weight can a person hold above their heads while they're screwing something into a unistrut. And all of these discoveries and conversations really inspired and kind of influenced how we started to structure our 3D model, and then ultimately how we documented the entire system to give it to the contractor. We also upscaled our lighting explorations. We invited HLB, our lighting consultants, to the warehouse, and we had many late nights playing around with the light, getting so excited about the discoveries of using different intensity, directionality, iterating in real time, getting feedback and iterating again with them on our side. It really created a streamlined conversation and fostered a very fruitful partnership with them. This also started to get incorporated into the art program that happens throughout the building. And we worked with Kathy McClure, a local Seattle artist, and she was really motivated to expand the wood story that we had been crafting for this building. And she was inspired by the microscopic cell structure of Pacific Northwest trees. For example, here you see the Douglas fir cell structure, and that directly influenced how she was designing these perforated panels. And the idea here is that these panels would be at the bottom of the chandelier, light would be shone onto them, and the projected image would be casted onto the ground floor, trying to mimic the dapple light effect that you might find as you're hiking through a Pacific Northwest forest. So here's an image of the mock-up in its final form. This became such a useful tool. Luckily, we were able to have it up for almost a year. And we would bring the client, the contractor, the artist to start to have conversations and in real time looking at, that detail. How can we expand that? And this just became a very useful tool. It actually was so successful that the client actually hired us to fabricate the art panels for the final installation. And so this was actually one of the first things we did in using the design lab that we have here down below. And again, really reinforcing that these meaningful partnerships with our consultant and with our artists that carry all the way through installation and then to its final form. And this is an image taken exactly a week ago at the open house for the Summit Seattle Convention Center. And this is just one of many, many examples you can see at the office where we tried to expand the conventional design process, where us as designers step outside of our computer and physically engage with our designs. It's also a great example of many, many others where we prioritize collaboration and working with talented professionals to get to a shared outcome. And all of these ideas are really at the core of how we design and practice here at LMN. Thank you.
Thank you, Vanessa, and also to our other presenters, Scott, Osama, Hanna, and Leo. It was great to dive into some of your current projects in Seattle and the Pacific Northwest. And I wanted to kick us off with a few questions, but just remind our audience that we have time for your questions as well. So feel free to drop them in the Q&A box below. And I wanted to start with kind of just thinking about your role in the current evolution and redevelopment of Seattle's urban core. So you mentioned a few projects that are in that urban core and on the waterfront. And Osama, you talked about how that connection is being kind of stitched back together with after the removal of the viaduct a few years ago that had previously kind of severed the two. So I wonder if you all could kind of share a little bit about how you see LMN's role in this redevelopment and restitching together of the Seattle urban core with the waterfront. And what are the core principles that you hope to achieve with your projects in this part of Seattle?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really great question, and I'll maybe start and then let a couple others jump in here. But I'll say to start off, you know, a lot of our projects engage with kind of the urban fabric of cities, and of course, Seattle being where we are is so important to us to think about how we engage. That starts, I think, with before we start to design. So our firm is also involved in advocacy and engaging with you know, the electeds in the city, and we're very involved in the waterfront as that started to develop, you know, even 20 years ago, as we were having conversations about highways and what they would do, and how we as architects could be involved in thinking about, you know, the transformation of our city. Currently, one of the big projects that we're excited about in our downtown core, the city of Seattle and the region is actually looking at a regional light rail system. They have one now, but they're putting in a new line, and LMN is involved in some of the early designs on 5 of the stations that'll be in the downtown core. And what's great about these is that they're super complex because they're not, you know, outside of the city. They're in the middle of this kind of dense core, but they're also in neighborhoods that are really vibrant, have kind of a cultural history. There's one of the stations is in the International District, which is our historical Chinatown and where our kind of historical Asian American community is. One of the stations is along the Seattle Center, which is an important cultural open space in the city. And so there's a lot to do to think about how we work with the neighborhoods, how we work with the community, to really think about how these interventions are going to change those neighborhoods, and really making sure that those changes push them in a positive way, and really start to think about you know, the life of the community, the life of the participants in the city, and how these kind of large scale, as we're talking about infrastructure projects, you know, are really going to influence everybody. And we were talking the other day about how many people are going to go into the convention center, but we were also getting excited about how many thousands of people are going to go through these transit stations, you know, as we start to develop them, and the impact that the architecture is going to have on the community in the city.
And just to add to that, I think that especially the aquarium and the convention center, these large civic projects, I think they have, as Osama was saying, this feature or character that they're going to bring and attract a lot of visitors to our region. So they're going to become these potential catalysts for a lot of economic growth and future development in the city. But I think that also, and going back to that slide in our presentation where we show the public benefits, you know, extent of this project, how it affects the community, I think that we as architects, we are always interested in how we can leverage these projects, these opportunities to actually make for a better city, a better neighborhood. How can it improve, you know, the urban life in our city?
And I think one more piece to add to it is looking at how it's not just our projects that we have the opportunity to increase that benefit or create those relationships with the community. And part of why we took and sought out the new space that we have across the street as this storefront, where we can actually have more of a physical presence within our city. And the hope there is that we're participating in things like the Art Walk event, but that also we're starting to have conversations within that space where we bring in other professionals to talk about, as an industry, how should we be engaging these technologies and the idea of making and collaborations with artists and engineers, and really not try to keep those conversations just within our own walls, but open them up more broadly with the hope that we will take and help to increase these conversations across the entire city.
Yeah, I wanted to ask just a little bit more about the design lab and what you have planned down there. So you mentioned there's some fabrication that would happen there in the shop space, and then maybe some event spaces. Can you say a little bit more about what you have planned?
So I think the initial impetus for this grew out of us starting to take and actually fabricate things for our projects, and recognizing that the current shop that we have in the basement of the Norton building that we're in at 1,000 square feet wasn't really enough for us to go beyond just some experimentations. But if we wanted to get into the productions of things, we needed even more space. And then in thinking about that, it was the idea of how can we invite others into that space, and what would we even want to invite them for? So we're hoping that we can take and showcase collaborators' work, be able to have artists that we work with and know come into that space and have them put on an exhibit, rather than it just being about showcasing our work. We're good friends with the folks at McNeil, the developers of Rhino, that are actually located here in Seattle. And we've already been talking to them about hosting training workshops using their tools within our space, that we could invite other outside professionals to come take part in those exercises. Talking to the University of Washington about different types of crossover events we could have, where we can invite their students into the space. And even thinking more broadly of how can we take and engage communities within Seattle and populations within Seattle that might not typically be as involved or have availability to enter the architecture profession, and how do we get them early in middle school and high school and allow them to come into our space and explain to them this is what it looks like to be an architect, and that it's something that isn't something they should shy away from or be intimidated by, but show them the excitement that we all have for doing it, and hopefully open up some thinking on their part of a future they might want to explore.
That's great. I think your approach and prioritization of this kind of community collaboration is what really sets your work apart as a firm, and particularly how you work with artists and craftspeople. And I just wanted to kind of use that as a link to bring in a question from the audience. There was a question about how exactly you find the artists and craftspeople that you work with. This person said, do you go to neighborhood art walks, etc., or do these people get brought into the project by the owners and community groups that you're working with? So maybe if you could give us a little insight about how you find the huge range of artists and craftspeople that you work with.
Can maybe,
go
I can maybe just really quickly for the Washington, for the Seattle Convention Center, I think there was a process that was established in order to select the artists, but I think there was a lot of focus actually to get artists that were starting their careers. There's I think over 20 art pieces in the Seattle Convention Center project. We try to have them all in areas that they are mostly public, that you don't need to be inside the building to experience the art. And I think half of those artists that were selected, this is their first public art opportunity. Another aspect that we also took into account is to have artists that could actually represent the diversity of our community here in Seattle, So that's all part of where we're thinking when we're trying to, when we're selecting artists to collaborate with.
Yeah, maybe tag on to that, Leo. So first of all, the Seattle Convention Center that Leo talked about has a great art program. So for anybody who's in Seattle, even just walking on the outside of the building, the art is pretty amazing. And, every project that we work on, the artist comes into the picture in a different way. whether we're working with a private client or working with a public entity. Oftentimes the public entities have rosters, and of public artists, but like Leo was talking about, there's this real drive to go beyond the artists that are always used and really find emerging artists. One of the things that we bring to the table is helping to enable those emerging artists that maybe haven't done public artwork before. So we sit down and work with them. So on the Seattle Aquarium, there was a desire both by the Seattle Aquarium as well as the city to have a number of Indigenous artists participate on the waterfront. And so one of the things we did through connections we made on the Seattle Convention Center, we met a native artist facilitator, somebody who helps to bring in artists and put the call out to artists. And so we engaged with her early, and she wrote a brief to bring artists to the table, really looking for artists that had kind of a blood connection to the land. So with a Coast Salish background, but also they had money to work with artists who had never done this kind of work before to come to the table. So like on the Seattle Convention Center, they brought a weaver who you would never think would do that kind of work in a public setting, and find ways to workshop with her and with the architects to think about what might happen. And two things came out of the Seattle Aquarium work. One is we brought Down Friday on, and again, Scott took him down to our shop, and it was through our shop and through working hands-on with the artists that the art really started to emerge, through making mock-ups, through developing different systems and talking about different ways that the art could be incorporated. And Dan had this big vision for the project, but he's a glass blower by trade. He worked with Chihuly, he worked with others in the region. And so really going to other materials, I think it was great to have that collaboration with him and working with our shop. But then the other great thing that came out of that was all of the artists that didn't get selected, because we went through this rigorous RFP process. And just like architects, it's a bummer when you don't get selected. But we wanted to encourage artists to continue to work. So anybody who applied was put on a roster, and the city of Seattle started to use that roster to select artists for other works that they had. And those artists have been working with other teams like James Corner Field Operations and other collaborators that we have on the waterfront. And it's been great to see that happen and to have a project be a catalyst for that kind of work.
Yeah, that's great. It's really wonderful to think about how you work with artists not only to kind of like adorn buildings and spaces with art, but like really integrate their work into the space and the design of environments within the building. And there's another question from the audience that I thought would be good to answer now, which is about just asking for tips and recommendations that you might have for other designers who want to work with artists in this way and incorporate their work into the design of the building. Do you have any recommendations for how designers might work and communicate efficiently with artists and craftspeople?
I would say bring them on board as soon as you're able to. Really establishing that communication and that partnership is so crucial. And then actually, give them an understanding of the architecture and have that back and forth. Collaboration with them and not making them feel that you're the artist, I'm the architect. Okay, there's a clear divide between our roles, but it is really a shared goal that you're after.
Yeah, and just kind of blending our tools. So, we would do sketching sessions with them, and then we can take their sketch and model it in Grasshopper and, translate that into something architectural and do iterations that way, which has been really fruitful.
Yeah, I was going to ask if there are like specific tools, like modeling tools that you use when you're working with artists. And, what is that process like to kind of merge your two worlds of different ways of envisioning, spaces and environments? Are there specific tools that you found to be really helpful in that regard?
I
All
would
of them.
say physical, all of them, but like just going back to the chandelier, the artist Kathy actually is a small scale object a sculptor. Beautiful work, but at a much smaller scale. And then this is her very first kind of 180 feet spatial installation. And the mock-up and actually looking through kind of like how we are going to use the light to shine it through. That little scaled model that we created was so crucial, where she could spin it around and not, go in the computer kind of, limited by that. But physical models are huge for it.
One other story too is that during the whole art process here for the Seattle Convention Center, we like to make large models, physical models here in our studio. And then the artists would come to our studio sometimes with small mock-ups or their art installations, and would put in our model and use that to see how that would actually be incorporated into the building too. So any medium, grasshopper, like Hanna said, and physical mock-ups and models.
Also, if you look above Scott's head, there are some unistruts, and we have unistruts and other things all around our office. And if you walk in our office, there are all kinds of things hanging from them. And we, often work with the artists to build these mock-ups, hang them up in our space and see what they look like. And we do that throughout our office. And it's really fun to see people kind of interacting with that. But, the office and the shop is a laboratory.
Nice. This kind of leads to another question from the audience about actually constructing these mock-ups and models. And maybe this relates to Vanessa, the chandelier that you were showing us photos of for the convention center. But this person asks, are LMN employees constructing these full-size mock-ups, or do you contract out that work to fabricators, carpenters, etc.?
It depends. Every project is different, and every client and every contractor is different. For my specific example of the chandelier, we created 4 different mock-ups at the warehouse. 3 of them were constructed by the contractor, but the chandelier, because there were still a lot of unknowns through the design of the chandelier, we advocated to actually build it ourselves. So we created a 30-foot by 15-foot mock-up, full-scale mock-up that you saw kind of on those photos. And we actually gathered 5 LMNers to go down to the warehouse, and we did it in about a day and a half. And it was amazing. It was an incredible experience that really impacted all of how we were thinking about it. But I'll let others talk about other examples, because I know that was kind of a unique aspect that maybe in other mock-ups, you have more of a contractor-led mock-up.
To build on it, one of the things that we've learned, like we've had in-house a CNC machine for now 11 years, our own machine. And there is an extreme amount of value when you show up to a meeting with a contractor and you have a built thing out of the actual material. Sometimes it's an approximation of the material, and you say, hey, I built this thing. This is the idea that we have for the project. It's more valuable than showing up with a rendering of it, because all of a sudden you can point to all the things like, I don't like how this works. I don't like how this works. And we've found that as a communication tool for these built objects, especially when they're not the typical thing or it's a completely custom design, become really helpful in having that collective conversation. So much to the point that like we have gained enough confidence in that process of building our own mock-ups and seeing the value of staff actually taking that on themselves and learning about the processes along the way, that we're now putting ourselves in the position on projects where we volunteer to the client to say, like, we can actually take on this portion of the project and we will build ourselves the final product to then deliver to the project and have the contractor install. And it just becomes really engaging for us, I think, to be that highly involved in it, and the way in which you start learning about the material and the assembly and sequencing and things like that, parts of the project that sometimes we're not ever really a part of in the decision making. But once you get that, it's kind of infectious, and the next time you're designing something, you start thinking about all those little things you learned when you were doing that mock-up or prototyping of the original.
It's interesting to hear you talk about the tools that you use to kind of like facilitate conversation and collaboration. And we've kind of talked about that in terms of working with artists, and now we're talking about how you do that working with contractors. But I'm wondering if you could talk about it in terms of how you work with communities, because I know that community engagement and getting community input into the design and early phases of design processes for these public and community facing projects is really key to like how you work and how you shape design. So like, what are the tools that you use that you found effective in working with communities and getting that kind of like community input into shaping your designs?
Well, maybe to start us off here, I mean, I think first of all, every community is different, right? And so I think we approach every community from that lens, starting to understand them and trying to determine whether we need collaborators that need to be on our team at the table with us. You know, that's definitely been the case as we work with the tribes, is to really understand and navigate kind of the nuances and the importance of who are the right people to connect with and how to connect with them, or whether it's working in our city with some of the various diverse neighborhoods that we have here. But going back to the tools, you know, we believe strongly in engagement, you know, and going out early in the design. And I think nothing, you know, it's kind of the same thing. I think we believe nothing beats a physical model or mock-ups or things that are to scale. And then when we're doing that, you know, as a way to engage and a way to get people to really understand what we're talking about, because you bring drawings or you talk and people don't always understand the issues, and, you know, really trying to find the right, whether it's a digital model or a physical model, right way to engage people. And in some instances, we've been successful in also, you know, doing hands-on things with the community, whether it's pro bono work or whether it's for a project. We have an urban design group. We talk a lot about, you know, strategic urban interventions that are at scale, that can help people see how we might change or activate places within a neighborhood. And we've done that in places like Little Saigon, in Seattle, as well as other places.
That's great. And I have another question from the audience, kind of piggybacking on that. This person asks, how do you work with sociologists, anthropologists, or environmental justice economists for communities that are not tourists? So yeah, thinking about how you connect to the communities that are already there. And maybe this was related to the convention center project, and thinking about, you know, that a lot of people using that building will be visitors and tourists, but how do you really use the tools of different, you know, people who have different roles in our communities in order to tap into what's needed for local communities who are already here?
I think one of the things that serves us well within our process is the diverse array of project types that we end up working on. And because of that, we have all of these experiences where sometimes there's an actual requirement on a project to need to work with a certain collaborator, a scientist of some type, because of an issue that pertains to that project. But then we try to take and make sure that we're mixing up people's experience in the office to work on a diverse array of projects so that they have that rich experience themselves. And I think when you go from working, say, on a performing arts facility and working directly with an acoustician about how the sound is going to bounce through the space and the way in which you want to control it to give the ideal performance environment, if you then go work on a higher ed project, you're not losing that experience, and you have the recognition like, oh, maybe we need to actually talk to an acoustician on this, and here are the issues that we need to be diving into. So I think for all of our projects, there's different expertises that we have to engage, and that kind of experience that we have on all of these different project types allows us collectively to know when we should be bringing another voice into it, and recognizing that we are not the experts in a lot of these things, but instead the more of these perspectives that we get to engage, the richer that our understanding of the outcome is going to be in the end.
And just you go.
No, go ahead, Leo.
I was going to say that for the Seattle Convention Center, we actually worked with a historian. So we have what we call the city stories, which are kind of these breadcrumbs, kind of things that we spread throughout the building, like kind of they are basically printed on surfaces of the building. And so you kind of discover those things while you're in the building. And then one of the ideas that we had during that process and working with the historian was actually to don't tell the stories that everybody knows about Seattle. You know, we're not going to tell stories about Space Needle or the touristic things in Seattle. We wanted actually to bring the stories that like they are, that represents, you know, everybody in this community, and focus actually more in underrepresented groups in our community. So there's a lot of these stories that are throughout the building here on the convention center.
Osama, are you going to chime in?
No, I think that was great. What Leo said.
It just, in answering that question, it just strikes me, what I've always appreciated about LMN is your curiosity. Like, you just have this interest in learning from other people and not like assuming that you're the expert on anything. And I think that kind of just carries into like the office culture that you have. And this is just an aside, but everyone who I've ever known who's worked at LMN has just been like a very like happy person, and like you know, I think in the culture of architecture as it's practiced today in this country, it's kind of rare to find that type of office culture where people seem happy and like balanced. And I just wonder if you could maybe share a couple of other like attributes of your office culture that you think maybe contribute to staff well-being, and like what are the important things that you all could identify as just contributing to like a positive office culture?
A month from now, a group of us are all going on a ski trip together. As I was mentioning during the intro, on Thursdays, we gather after work to exchange stories about what people have going on in their personal lives outside of the office. I think I know myself, a lot of my very close friends are actually people on this screen right now, and others within the office. And I think that there's an openness of just wanting, we're already going to spend so much time together. And so then doing it, how do we have fun with it? Actually, a number of us also on the screen are part of the LMN soccer team. We have lots of like little groups within the office.
Wait a minute, we're all part of the LMN soccer team, I think.
We are. Some show up to the game,
yeah.
some don't.
Some don't, right?
Yeah. I think we try to make sure that we both have passion for the work that we're doing, but then also that we're always having fun and enjoying what we're doing together, because if we don't have that, then it's kind of what is spending all this time really for.
Yeah, I'd love to hear from, go ahead, Vanessa.
Yeah, I was going to say, so this is my first job out of grad school. Now I'm 7 years into it. But I just remember coming in as a, brand new professional person into an office, which could potentially be scary. But it just felt like a warm place and very welcoming place to enter. I vividly remember that I as an intern was placed among in our kind of seating chart next to partners. And I was like, what am I doing here? But this idea of there's no kind of boundaries between partner level or associate level or intern level. Everybody has the same voice, and kind of able to share their ideas, share their opinions in an equal playing field. And I found that to be an amazing experience coming right out of grad school.
And then just to add, I think the office as a whole has been really flexible in terms of like, COVID, work from home, we do summer Fridays and kind of just test out different things that kind of increase people's work-life balance. And I feel like the office just does a good job prioritizing that.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, Lauren, I did want to build off of your comment about the research and what that also does for the life of people in the office. And I think to really be dedicated to asking questions and research, you have to be excited about it. And so when we do have people that are excited about something and they want to dig in, we try really hard to encourage that and provide a space for that to happen. Because if you're not interested, if you're not dedicated to it, it's not going to go very far. And an example of that is we recently were asked to do a TI for a space, for an office space, and the client wanted to be as net zero carbon as they could be on that project. And it just sparked something in the team, and they started to do all of this research about cradle to grave and what happens to materials when we tear them out and how can we reuse things, and really digging deep into a different way of doing a TI than we had ever done before. And so it's all scales of projects, but that was really the team that just got so excited about the question and about the prospects of how they could be sustainable in a real way that wasn't just, glossy pictures, but it was actually preventing things from going to landfills and really tracking the carbon and really seeing what that meant. And the team dug in and they knocked it out of the park. And I think fundamentally, that's what makes us as designers and architects excited, is to get into the work that that we can really sink our teeth into and makes us happy.
That's good. Yeah, I wanted to ask another question about your path to zero carbon and your sustainability commitments, because I think that is also what sets you apart as a firm and what kind of defines your designs, but always in this kind of quiet, not overly over the top sustainability way, which I think is you really let the design shine, and instead of just broadcasting that it's a sustainable project, but the two always go hand in hand. And so I just wondered if you could share a little bit more about what you're excited about in terms of these sustainability commitments that you have and that you've made, and what type of design possibilities you see perhaps surrounding these sustainability commitments in future projects or projects that you're working on now.
Yeah. So to build off of the Heinz renovation Osama was mentioning, I think that was just a really great case study and kind of proof of concept for the office. And now, we can apply that aggressive embodied carbon net zero strategy to our bigger scale projects, which is really exciting for us. But I think really at the end of the day, it's about inspiring our clients to kind of embrace these goals too. For example, the aquarium, we're in construction, but the client is still, analyzing things of like, how can we do this better? How can we make this more sustainable? What can we do here? So I think that's really where we can make a really big difference.
Are you finding, I'm just curious, working with clients today, generally, is it easy to kind of get them on board with your sustainability, goals and commitments, or do you find you have to kind of educate them and bring them along? What's been the general temperature check on that lately?
Well, I think it's definitely something we start talking about early in design, and we've always seen the aspirations kind of inflate as we go. So, as we start things, we're mentioning different sustainability topics, and then as we progress through design, clients are getting more and more on board, and they're more excited to kind of chew off different pieces.
Just add, there's the aspect of not all things do we necessarily need to directly go to the client and say, this is going to be a budget impact, but we think it would have a performance increase. It's us knowing how to effectively do these things where we're not needing to necessarily take and have a conversation with the client to say, we're going to lower the energy use of this building by making these decisions. We're just implementing those lessons that we learned on past projects. And I think understanding where we can get a lot of impact without necessarily a lot of heavy lifting to make something happen. And that's, I think, the exciting part at times when you get to go back to the client and say, oh, by the way, there's these added performance things that are happening on the project, or it's going to use this much less energy. And they're surprised of like, well, what did we do to do that? It's just part of how we're approaching the overall design.
Yeah. I thought it would be nice to kind of close out with hearing from you about what else you're working on outside of Seattle and the Pacific Northwest. We focused in a lot on projects here in the region, but know that you're doing work all across the country and North America. So can you give us just a flavor of what else you're working on? And then maybe how your work here is influencing how you approach public projects elsewhere.
Yeah, so I'm currently working on a project for the UCSD campus. That's University of California, San Diego. And it is a 4-building project, and it's a very complex, complicated project. Buildings that differ in program, like health and well-being, offices and classrooms, but also incorporating a meta gallery with an immersive gallery, and then added to a celebration space, all with parking involved. And really our work here in Seattle, our work with the University of Washington and their higher ed programs have really taught us how to actively program these buildings to make successful projects. The complex projects that we've had here in Seattle, even the convention center, dealing with entitlements and how to integrate the urban framework of a city into such a complicated and large project have really, really directly impacted how we're doing things in that project.
What else?
Well, so we're doing, and Scott can jump in here because he's doing some of it. But we're doing higher ed projects all over the country. I mean, we've got projects in the Carolinas, up in Michigan, and we've got some projects in Ohio. I think recently we are now working on a project in Saskatoon. So a really diverse kind of array of places: Arizona, Utah, all kind of really interesting buildings for university campuses. We're working on conference and convention centers in those places. And in Columbus, Ohio, we were recently working on a kind of high-speed rail project. And again, going back to that urban and civic infrastructure and really thinking about the communities and how we're connecting communities through sustainable transportation. So we do have a lot going on throughout the country, and it's really kind of exciting.
Yeah, I think what's cool is like we've done a number of mass timber projects here within the Washington area, but now we're starting to get those projects in other states. And so being able to take that knowledge and then adapt it to those other locations while working with different fabricators. So a project that I'm currently working on is at UC Berkeley. It's a new classroom building, but the entire structure for that is going to be mass timber, but being done in a way that we haven't done before. And so I think always with our projects, there's something that we've had as an initial go at it. And then the next time we get to do it, we have all of that knowledge that we're trying to build on. And there are some things that we can transfer from one place to another. And then there are other things where we have to kind of adapt a little more. Seismic requirements are even larger within California than they are in Washington. So it brings along some fun challenges that you have to resolve.
Definitely.
Yeah, and
go ahead.
I just wanted to put a plug in for one more thing, because we've talked about some of our projects, but we're also deeply involved in performing arts. and cultural facilities, both in Seattle and around the country. I mean, in Seattle, we're doing quite a few, and there's a lot going on in other parts of the country, you know, and then also doing a lot of, you know, office work, and, you know, Seattle's a big tech hub. So, you know, working with a lot of those clients around the, you know, in their different regions, it's been exciting work.
Great.
Thank you all. I hate to cut this off because I feel like we could all go on talking for a whole lot longer, and there've been some great questions from everybody, and there's still a remarkable amount of people online. I'm going to hear more about everything from fabrication to construction to collaboration to clearly baseball and soccer. So, but thank you so much for opening your office to us, showing your work. And then this has just been terrific to have you all arrayed throughout the office and talking to us as a group. It's been a super conversation and a great way to start the online part of our FF programs for 2023. So thank you very much.
Thank you for having us.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
thank you.